welcome back for a new episode of UX Change. It's been quite a while. I have been busy with other projects, and so I'm sorry for the time it took for this episode. I wanted to thank everyone who's been listening for the episodes, the few episodes that I have per week or per 2 weeks or whatever. So thank you. And again, if you want to provide some feedback, head over to the website, my website that is mentioned in the show notes. Today we'll talk about a topic that has been addressed with many of my mentees in my mentorship sessions. You have been many to ask me how should we structure a research plan. So for those who don't know, for those who want to get into UX research and who don't know what is a research plan, I will go also over this. And basically, just as a disclaimer, I really just outlined, I scribbled some notes down for this episode, and from now on, since I don't have a lot of time, this is how I will do. So if I stumble, I apologize in advance. And by the way, this episode will not be edited. I honestly don't have the time. So again, if I stumble, I apologize in advance. And last thing before we begin, I will strive to make it short, but don't worry if you have first of all, some questions. You can always reach out through the website. You can post some comments and you can reach out to me, first of all. Second of all, we will go over the different sections of a research plan. The intent of this episode is not to go deep into each one of the sections. This can be then addressed in further episodes. So let's begin. First, what is a research plan? So basically, when you do research, of course, the fact of doing research is basically to try to answer some questions you have and try to decrease the uncertainty, the risk before developing a product by narrowing down, let's say, the uncertainty that you have. So if you want to learn more about a behavior from a customer, their pain points, their problems, their expectations, and so on. But imagine you want to develop a completely new product and you don't know anything about your target audience. Well, it might be useful to run some research. As I strive to always explain in previous episodes, discovery first, validation after, and then going on iteratively, of course. So adopting this double diamond process. But so this is why we do research, basically to try to reduce as much as possible the risk before launching and iterating on a product, decrease the costs. This can be the topic for a new episode about why it's important to run, basically in a nutshell, research as soon, as early, and as frequently as possible. But basically, as you have to run research, it's also good to streamline the process. And so the research plan is done for this. So not only for this, but it's one of the reasons. So a research plan, basically, the goal of a research plan is to outline the strategy you will have, outline your approach and your planning for this research. So it's basically that. So you can have as many goals as you want, and it goes for many areas of life. If then you don't have a strategy to apply those goals, you might fail because of that. So that's what the research plan is for. So basically to outline the strategy for you to answer the questions that the business or the stakeholders have regarding your users and regarding the product. So this is the main goal. But then also you have also other reasons why you should do a research plan, be it for yourself, if you're a solo practitioner, if you're a freelancer, if you work at a company. In any case, the points that I'm going to mention now apply more or less in any situation. So first of all, to give visibility to your stakeholders. When you run research, you rarely run research alone, even if you run by yourself as a passion project, then when you will share in your portfolio presentation, if one day you want to be hired by a company or by clients, you will have to share this research plan. This is often asked. So yeah, basically to give visibility to stakeholders, because they might have a say in that. And that's the second point. Before you run any research, you run a research for stakeholders, right? That's where the name comes from. That's what it stands for. Stakeholders is someone who has a stake in your research, who is interested in your research. So as they're interested, they might have, and by the way, this is an advice I can give you, they might have interest in looking at it before you go into user testing or any other type of research. They might want to go have a glance, because they might want to refine some questions. They might want to tell you, oh, sorry, but you did not understand it as I expected. Maybe it's me, but whatever. We have to align right now, because then it's too late when you run the research. And if you don't align in time, this happened to me in the past. I can speak of out of experience. When you don't align in time, then you end up at the end of the research and you discover some things, but that are of no value for your stakeholders. And conversely, the opposite is also true. You did not explore some things that were expected by your stakeholders. So avoid this by drafting out a research plan and by aligning with your stakeholders when you craft it and before you launch the research, of course. It's also good for the future. I like to think that in the information era, in our jobs, it's a thing to do your task, what you've been assigned, but the more you document things, and the coders listening to me will agree, I think, the more you document, the more you comment, the more you indicate what was your rationale behind your choices, the better. For at least two audiences that I have in mind. It's for other people who might look at your documents in the future. Imagine new journalists of the company, or maybe stakeholders who got your document way after you did your research and they want to dive into it. So this happens so often for me, for my colleagues, for other stakeholders. Sometimes we begin a project and we want to know about the previous projects that have been done on the topic, and what we have sometimes is a report. And so a report might not be enough, because you want to know as well the specifics, and sometimes some specifics are only mentioned in the research plan. Then it's a matter of organizing information. This is true, but the more you do it, the better the information will be retrieved. And in the end, this is time saved and so money saved for your company. So try to adopt this as a practice. So the first person that I have in mind is the people that might access this research, but way after you did it, right? But you can also consider future you. So I'm not a coder, but in the past, I tried for a passion project to code some apps. And it happened to me that I coded, and then when I came back to my code, I did not understand anything because I didn't comment anything. And so this is also true for research. If you do something, whatever it is, if you go on vacation or you take over other projects and sometimes some time has passed by, and you come back to it, well, you might have forgotten it, of course. So when you come back to it, you might have to go back into the specifics and so on. And so by having the research plan, this will help you refresh your memory. So as I was saying, giving visibility to stakeholders, aligning with them for the future, and so on. So this is, let's say, this is for you, for your stakeholders, but this is like ways of working, let's say. But now there are also deeper reasons why you want to do a research plan that are inherently linked to your tasks and to your approach of a project. We might approach a project or a problem a certain way by directly drafting our questions in a script for our users and then entering the user testing and so on, because, I don't know, we feel we are super experienced and then there is no need because we are losing time. There is no need to craft a research plan. So as I was saying, for all the reasons I said before, this is never time lost, first of all. But now I also believe that by writing all the informations that I'm about to tell you that go into the research plan, it will also force you to focus. It will also force you to define what is relevant and what is not. If you don't do this exercise of writing down what is relevant for your research, you might end up with, like, how can I say, a kind of a kind of always going back and forth in your mind when you write a question for your script, when you analyze the results from your user sessions, because you will never have in mind really clearly what is in focus, what is out of focus, what are the research questions that I should answer, what are the hypotheses. Your mind can only hold a certain number of items at a time. By the way, working memory studies have shown that it's 7 items at a time. So if I give you a sequence of numbers, more or less, depends on the people, you will remember 7. Anyway, so we have already so many things to think about on a daily basis. If you always have to remember when you analyze your results, what were the objectives of this research, so that when I present my insights, I will present them so that they answer the objectives. I want to ask these questions to the user. Is it relevant? Is it answering my research question? If you're always asking yourself that, first of all, you will lose time, you will lose focus, you will run the risk of not being relevant and not asking the right questions, and so on. So, how can I say? Get load off your memory by writing things down. By the way, this applies in many areas of life. But basically, write everything down. Write your problem statement. A good problem statement is not written in only one. How can I say? In one go. Let's say you have to refine it. I don't know who said that, and it's really, really interesting, is that 90 or something, let's say it's like bro science probably, but anyway, 90-ish% of your solution, when you ideate on solutions to answer users' needs and users' problems, 90-ish% of this solution comes from defining well the problem statement. And so by defining it, by writing it down, it will help you to define it. A good problem statement, from a good problem statement come then good research questions and good hypotheses, and from that ultimately you can build your script so that everything is aligned and everything is coherent. So you really need this to be written down. And now let's focus on the components of this research plan. So first of all, it begins with a research background. So when you run any research, you want to know what has been done first, both in the company, maybe outside. Maybe you can access some studies on databases of studies. And so this is really useful here to link past studies and anything that can help you give context to this research. So basically analytics from the company, some design decisions that have been made that you can trace back. This is something that I could go over this in a subsequent podcast episode, because this is a really a problem that is recurring, that I see in many companies. They don't trace back their design decisions. And so when you arrive on a project, you ask, okay, why is the stimuli, where are the stimuli this way? Well, I don't know. That's how it is, and that's it. Okay, maybe you are the designer and maybe you don't know, but we as a collective, as a company, we should strive for knowing at a current moment, at a given moment, why is the prototype the way it is. So that we as a researcher, we can build our hypothesis. This is super important. We can say, okay, this process is done in three steps. This flow is done in 3 steps, and it has a pop-up because blah blah blah, because we observed that blah blah blah. So that when you redesign something, we as researchers, we can build assumptions, hypotheses, and research questions, and then ultimately ask the customers the right questions to test if what you're implementing to gather the data you're interested in, basically. So everything is linked. That's why. So in the research background, it's super useful to include design decisions, secondary research, and business decisions, of course, if you have access to that. But again, I don't want to go too deep into this category or in any, by the way. It's just an overview of what are the categories that should go in a research plan. So first of all, research background. Second of all, your project goal. So basically, why are you running this project? Here, then there is let's say, it's contentious. People do things at different ways, of course. And by the way, everything that I'm telling now doesn't have to be the way. Everyone does it a different way, depending on the needs of your company. Maybe you will have some categories in your research plan that make sense for your company. Maybe some of them that I'm gonna mention now don't make sense. Just take this as examples. What is working for me? I have been refining it several ways depending on the companies that I have been working for, and so do what works for you. But this is just provided as guidance. So second category is the project goal. Why are you running this research? And yes, so there are different, as I was saying, it's contentious because some people include here the overall project, including the design, including the A/B testing, including development, and so on. Analytics, you can include that as well. It can help. I am let's say, in the team of the people who think the more information, the better. Of course, we have to strive to be lean, but the more information, the better. So if you have the overarching context of your project, be it and include it. Then you can also include when I say project goal, it can also be the UX research project goal. So you can only also include the goal of the research itself. If you have this, it would be great to include the contribution to your company KPIs to justify this research. And I know you will think that, and that would be perfectly fair to say that, if you are running this research, it's because it's relevant. It should have been decided up in the management. And that's perfectly fair. But sometimes research is decided for arbitrary reasons by management, let's say. So when you're junior, when you're middle, sometimes you don't have a say in this, and you just take projects and you deliver, basically. It's more reactive. But you can have a say in the KPIs. It can help to let's say to contribute to the KPIs. Imagine you discover by crafting your research questions and your test that maybe you can assess how the ease of use of your prototype will impact I don't know, the error rate that your customer is making. I don't know, that was not, and that the error rate ultimately will contribute to increase customer retention. I'm saying random things, but maybe you discover that you can contribute to more KPIs, or maybe you can discover that what you're doing will not contribute to the KPI that you have been told it will contribute to. So it's also good for you to have a global vision. And if you want to gain, let's say, if you want to gain experience and more seniority, acquire more seniority, it's also something that is asked, is to have a more global vision into the business and the strategy, so that you can have a say in that in the future. So it's also a good practice to have. And then the UX metrics. What I call UX metrics, it can seem to be a very quantitative name, but it's more like the data you will gather. And this is really, up to now, again, it has been very, very debated in the companies I have been. Some of them included this, some of them didn't. I like to do it for me. Like, I like to know what data am I gonna gather, like in a list of bullet points. It's really helpful in my opinion. So by data, I include qualitative data. I don't know, maybe satisfaction. This can be acquired through a scale, okay. But maybe first impressions. This is really qualitative, but you can include it. You can say, we will gather first impressions. And then you can also include UX metrics that come from usability studies. So error rates, bounce rates, the paths that were followed, and so on. This is really useful to have at least this list in mind. Okay, and then the most important part of the research plan is the problem statement. The problem statement on top of the project goal is also something that justifies your research. What is the current problem the customers are having? And I will do an episode on that, how to define your problem statement. When you have several problem statements, what can you do? Should you do one study with several problem statements? Should you do several studies, and so on? How to plan them accordingly? So, but basically, yeah, define your problem statement. What pain is your customer having, and what are you conducting as a research to try to see how you can solve that pain, basically. It can be, it depends also on the type of research. If it's a very discovery foundational study, you might not know what is the pain of your customer. So sometimes you identify a problem statement by speaking with customers. That's also the first point. So basically that. Then the research goals, basically. And so in my opinion, it really cascades. You go from your project goal, then from that you can outline a problem statement. And from this problem statement, I like to think this as, let's say, several directions from which we can approach the problem statement. And these are the research questions. So you have a problem statement. So basically, as a customer, for instance, or as a young adult, I need an easy to follow process for me to track my finances, because I'm really busy and I do not have the discipline to do it myself, so I need to follow an easy process. This could be a problem statement, okay? And then you can subdivide this problem statement into several research questions. Okay, first of all, what is a young adult? That's a random things that I'm saying now. This doesn't have to be a real study, but this is how I see it, and I'm really saying that honestly at the top of my head. I have nothing written down, so maybe things don't make sense, but you see more or less the point. It's okay, who is the customer? Okay, he's a young adult, maybe, but maybe I need to characterize them further. What are their habits? What are their pain points? What are their experiences in terms of finance, and so on? So you decompose. Then I need an easy to follow process. What is easy to follow? Okay, what is the current process? Why is it occasioning? I'm not sure of the word. Pain points. What would be the expectations? Okay, then we have the last part, which is because I don't have the time or the discipline. Okay, why is blocking them? What is the discipline problem, and so on. So then you can subdivide into several research questions. Your research questions or goals depends how we see it. Oftentimes I phrase them as goals to communicate inside the company, but as questions for myself. So these are different, but basically it's almost the same. So for instance, how can we make the finance tracking easy to use? This can be a research question. And the research goal associated would be defining an easy to use process to track finance. It's almost the same. It's just the way it's worded, and maybe I do too much, but when I communicate, I can see that stakeholders, they like to follow the research goals, and for me, it helps me to see the research questions that I've answered them or not. It's really picky here. It's really a nitty-gritty detail, but for me, it makes a difference. So yeah, outline your research questions. As a practice, it's good to have between 3 and 4 research questions. Then it starts to be a bit much, a lot. So try to have only 3 or 4 research questions. Also, subdivide your research questions, because then you will have accountability for this. People will take accountability. So basically, you can subdivide them into UX research questions. So in general, quality questions, let's say, qualitative questions. Then you have data analytics questions. You can have questions that can be answered by reading customer support tickets, and so on and so on. So it's good to subdivide them by themes. If you're in charge of everything, maybe you should not. But if you have several teams that are points of contact that you should, contact to have access to this information, it's good to subdivide it, and then you just send or you comment into your file to for the people to take accountability. Then you have the hypothesis. So the hypothesis, as I was saying, if for instance you're testing a new prototype, it will be easy to access the hypothesis if you also have access to the design decisions that were made, the whys behind, previous results, and so on. So for instance, you can say that we believe that by adding a pop-up at this place with information about, I don't know, a finance, that it will help our young adults to stay engaged in the app, whatever. And so include this hypothesis because it's then easier for you when you have research questions and hypotheses to build your script for user testing. It's way easier. I can do also an episode on that, but basically you have your question, and then if you do a query, for instance, if your customer is not saying, if your participant is not talking about the point you want them to talk, you can ask a follow-up question. And what about the pop-up? Can you tell me more about this? But you would ask this because you outlined this in your research plan and you remember that this is important. That's the point. So really strive to be as exhaustive and as consistent as possible. Then the methodology. What methods should you use? So here, again, good principles of UX research. I would say the more the better, but of course this has a limit. You cannot use 1,000 methods because at some point you will spread thin. You will use several methods, but you will not go deep into each one. As a rule of thumb, I like to have, let's say, between 1 and 3, of course, at least 1, 3 maximum, to be able to approach the problem from several angles. So yeah, and so this is the point, having methodologies that you will run, but in this part of the research plan, what is good is to mention why you choose one research method over another, for instance. Why is it moderated? Why is it unmoderated? And so on. You can also justify why you do a behavioral method or not attitudinal research method, and so on, and the data you will collect for your stakeholders. I know we talked about the data you will collect before, but at this point, so the list before, it was only for me, in my opinion, the list we mentioned before, the UX metrics. After, in the methodology, it's about linking the choice of the research method to the data you will collect. In this case, for instance, we will run a card sorting activity because it is a good tool to uncover users' mental models and to redefine an information architecture, which is what we're trying to do in this step of the project. Then you move on to the scope. The scope is basically, what is the scope of this research? Who are you targeting? So who are your target users? And here, think about demographics. Are they, I don't know, male, female, other? You can also add the ages, the countries, if you are working for a company that does business internationally, or at least in more than one country or city, just indicate the reasons. And oftentimes the reasons are because we want to tackle this feature that is only present in this country, or because our main customer database is located in this country, or because this age range is the most dominant in our customers. So yeah, the most represented, and we want to have a representative sample. So these are oftentimes the reasons, but indicate the whys. This is important. And again, why it's important to indicate the whys, it's also for you to defend yourself when you talk to your stakeholders. Your choices are written down, and so it's less difficult for your stakeholders to say, oh, I would prefer this and that, with no reason shared. So you have a rationale, and so you decrease the risk of making decisions based on preference, or with no rationale at all, with no, how can I say, objectivity. So yeah, mention your reasons. And also the second point, as I was saying, imagine in 6 months you enter a new company and you want to dive into the past research that has been done and you want to maybe synthesize several points of the research to try to build a case about the need for doing this or that research, okay? If you gathered some insights in the past, if your teammates gathered some insights prior your arrival, maybe it will impact your ability to generalize depending on the audience, for instance, that was targeted. So maybe they have some insights, but it targeted only one population and not the one you want to target now, for instance. So it would be good to know. All these details are super important. And finally, the timeline. The timeline is super straightforward. It's basically what are the different steps of the project, and at what moment, at each step, what could be the deliverables, and at what time stakeholders can expect deliverables. It's basically that, so that everyone is aligned. It's really, it seems like a detail, but it's super important to speak deadlines and timeline before the project starts, so that expectations are set up front. And here, a quick tip, but everyone does it differently. When you do UX research, it's a good practice, but I believe it's a bit the same in other, I'm sure it's the same in other areas, of course. But I feel it's, in my opinion, in UX research, I'm not a pro of other areas, but in UX research, it can be more the case that we face over-promising and under-delivering. For instance, when you run qualitative research, you think you will do things that they will take a certain amount of time, but in the end, how can I say? If you do quant, for instance, I do both qual and quant, and I can compare. With quant, it's a bit more straightforward, because the numbers are here. You can make the numbers speak as long as you want, talk as long as you want, but in the end, if they were not your assumptions and your hypotheses and your research questions, data was not gathered to serve a purpose, so it's not exactly the same. So if you answered your research questions are answered. With qualitative, it's a bit different, because when you go qualitative because you want insights, basically. So you can reach a point where you always discover new insights, and you have to synthesize, and so on and so on. And so it can feel a bit overwhelming. So it's a good practice in terms of timeline for a UX researcher to under promise and over deliver. So in terms of timeline, always take into account the unexpected findings and so on. Or let's say a participant is not showing up to your interview. This is also something very common. So you have to reschedule, or you have to find new participants. So always take that into account. And that was it basically for today. This was the outline of a research plan. We went through the research background, the project goal, problem statement, research questions, hypothesis, the methodology, the scope, and the timeline. I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please rate this podcast and head over to my website, add some comments. I would love to hear about you. And again, I really thank you for your time listening, for your attention. It really means a lot to me. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.